They thought the orphan had nothing, until he bought 200 acres in cash and built what no one expected. What I found on that land wasn't just about my past. It was about a future for kids like me. If you've ever felt like you were starting from zero, this story is for you. Stick with me, and if it hits home, maybe subscribe, because we're building a community here for people with stories that need to be told. The day I turned 18, the world didn't celebrate. It just released me. Like a fish you're not allowed to keep, tossed back into a river too big and too cold. For 12 years, the Northgate Youth Authority had been my container, my address, my schedule, my identity. Now, all I had was a cardboard box with my name, Leo Vance, written on the side in black marker. Inside were 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book I'd read 100 times, and a state-issued debit card with $400 on it. My severance package from childhood. Mr. Henderson, the facility director, stood in the doorway of his office, his posture stiff with practiced detachment. He'd seen hundreds of kids walk out this door. To him, I was just another Tuesday. "Well, Leo," he said, adjusting his tie, a nervous habit he had whenever he was performing an emotional duty. "This is it. You're a man now, in the eyes of the law." His voice was flat, the words hollowed out by repetition. I just nodded. What was there to say? Thank you for the institutional gray walls and the powdered eggs? A dry, useless humor flickered in my chest, a small, cold spark. The air in the hallway was thick with the smell of industrial cleaner and unspoken anxieties. It was the smell of my entire life, and in 10 minutes I would never smell it again. The thought was both terrifying and intoxicating. I looked past him, down the long, polished corridor. The scuff marks on the linoleum were a map of my youth. The place I'd tripped, running from a bigger kid. The spot where I dropped a tray of food. The threshold I'd crossed after being told my parents weren't ever coming back. Each memory was a ghost, and the whole building was a graveyard. "You have your paperwork?" he asked, his gaze flicking to the large manila envelope I was clutching. It contained my birth certificate, my social security card, and a list of resources for transitional youth. Shelters, job centers, clinics, a survival guide for the unwanted. "Yes, sir," I said. The "sir" was automatic, a gear that had been worn smooth over years of use. He gave a single, tight nod. "The bus station is 6 blocks east. You have a ticket to the city. From there, it's up to you." He cleared his throat. "Good luck, son." The word son was so out of place it felt like a shard of glass in the air between us. He wasn't my father. I hadn't had one of those in a very long time. I turned and walked away, the squeak of my worn sneakers echoing in the sudden silence. I didn't look back. Looking back was a luxury I couldn't afford. Every step toward the heavy steel doors at the end of the hall felt like I was walking a plank. Outside, the world was too bright, too loud. The city air, humid and smelling of exhaust fumes, was a physical shock after the recycled air of Northgate. I stood on the concrete steps, the cardboard box digging into my hip, and felt a wave of vertigo so intense I had to steady myself against the brick wall. For the first time in my life, there was no one to tell me where to go. No bell to signal lunch, no lockdown at 10. The freedom was a crushing weight. I made my way to the bus station, my head down, trying to become invisible. The city was a blur of hostile faces and indifferent architecture. At the station, I found a hard plastic chair in the corner and waited. The ticket in my pocket was for a cross-state bus, a destination I'd picked at random from a map a week ago. A city where no one knew my name or the file number that had defined me for so long. As I sat there, A mail clerk from the group home, a timid woman named Mrs. Gable, hurried into the terminal. She was clutching a thick, cream-colored envelope. She spotted me, and her face flooded with relief. "Leo! Oh, thank goodness I caught you," she said, out of breath. "This came this morning. It's legal mail. From a lawyer. Mr. Henderson said I had to make sure you got it." She thrust it into my hands. It felt heavy, important. The return address was from a law firm in a town I'd never heard of, Blackwood Creek. My name was typed on the front, formal and correct. Leo Vance, not Vance L, Unit 7. I slit the envelope open with my thumbnail. The paper inside was thick, expensive. It was a letter. The first sentence stopped my breath. "Dear Mr. Vance," it began, "this letter is to inform you that, as the sole heir of the late Arthur Vance, you are the beneficiary of his estate." Arthur Vance, my grandfather, a man I had only the faintest dreamlike memory of. A tall figure smelling of sawdust and soil, who'd vanished from my life when I was 5. I'd been told he'd left, that he didn't want me. The story the social workers had settled on. The letter continued, and the world tilted on its axis. The estate wasn't money, not directly. It was a property. 200 acres of land, a farmhouse, and several outbuildings in a place called Sparrow Ridge, just outside of Blackwood Creek. The letter explained there were significant back taxes owed, a debt that had been accruing for over a decade. If they weren't paid within 90 days of my 18th birthday, the county would seize the property and sell it at auction. Enclosed was a key. It was old, iron, and heavy, the kind of key that opened a lock you could hear from the next room. There was also a folded, brittle document, a deed. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. This land, this place I never knew existed, was mine, if I could keep it. The bus to my new, anonymous life was boarding. Its engine rumbled, a low growl calling me toward the future I had planned. But in my hand, I held a key to a past I'd been told was a closed door. The $400 on my debit card felt like a joke. The back taxes, the letter noted, amounted to just over $32,000, an impossible sum. It was a cruel trick of fate, to be given a home and have no way to claim it. I looked at the bus, then at the heavy iron key. The choice should have been easy. Take the money, get on the bus, and let the ghost of Arthur Vance fade for good. But something held me there. A flicker of a memory, a scent of pine needles and wood smoke, a feeling, deep and resonant, that the story I'd been told about my life, the one where I was abandoned and unwanted, wasn't the whole story. I let the bus pull away from the curb, its taillights shrinking in the grimy twilight. I walked out of the station and found a payphone. I used the directory to find the number for the Blackwood Creek bus line. There was a bus leaving in an hour. It would take all night, heading in the exact opposite direction of where I thought I was going. I bought the ticket. I had a key in my pocket, a deed to a place I couldn't afford, and a sudden, terrifying sense of purpose. I was going home. Or at least, I was going to see what was left of it. The bus ride to Blackwood Creek was a journey through darkness, both literal and metaphorical. The city lights quickly gave way to the sprawling, anonymous suburbs, and then to the vast, empty blackness of the rural highway. The bus was old, the seats worn, and the air smelled of stale coffee and diesel fumes. I sat with my forehead pressed against the cold glass of the window, watching the occasional farmhouse light drift by like a lonely star. My cardboard box was stowed in the overhead rack, and the lawyer's envelope was tucked inside my jacket, its sharp corners pressing against my ribs. It felt like a heartbeat that wasn't my own. For 12 years, my world had been confined, predictable. Now, every mile the bus traveled was taking me further into the unknown. The other passengers were ghosts. A young mother with a sleeping child, an old man in a cowboy hat, a soldier in uniform staring blankly ahead. We were all in transit, suspended between a place we'd left and a place we hadn't yet reached. I felt a strange kinship with them, this temporary tribe of the displaced. I tried to sleep, but my mind was a frantic storm. Arthur Vance. The name echoed in my thoughts. My memories of him were fractured, like broken pottery. I remembered the rough, calloused feel of his hand holding mine. I remembered him lifting me up to see over a fence at a county fair. The smell of his flannel shirt. But there was a wall in my memory, a thick, gray fog that started around the time I turned 5. After that, nothing. The official story was simple. He was my only living relative after my parents died in a car crash, and one day, he just left, dropped me at a county services office and disappeared. He wasn't fit to be a guardian, one social worker had told me, her voice laced with a kind of weary pity. It was for the best, Leo. I had believed her. It was easier than believing he just didn't want me. Now, this land, this inheritance, it didn't fit that narrative. Why leave a 200-acre property to the boy you abandoned? It made no sense. The bus groaned and hissed, pulling into a small, brightly lit truck stop in the middle of the night. The driver announced a 30-minute break. I got out, needing to stretch my legs. The air was different here, crisp, clean, and cold. It smelled of pine trees and damp earth. I looked up. The sky was a riot of stars, a dense, glittering canopy unlike anything I'd ever seen from the light-polluted haze of the city. For a moment, the sheer scale of it all made my own problems feel small and insignificant. I bought a cup of coffee and a stale pastry from the convenience store. As I paid, the cashier, a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, looked at me. "You headin' far?" she asked. "Blackwood Creek," I said. Her smile tightened a little. "Oh, not many people heading to Blackwood Creek these days. Most are heading out." "Why's that?" I asked, my coffee suddenly feeling colder. She shrugged, wiping down the counter. "Nothing much there anymore. The mill closed down years ago. A big development company, Triton Global, has been buying up all the old family plots, building luxury vacation homes for city folks, tearing down the old places. Good for some, I guess. Bad for others." Triton Global. The name rang a distant, unpleasant bell, but I couldn't place it. I thanked her and went back outside, the information settling in my gut like a stone. A development company buying up old land, and my grandfather's property had a massive tax bill that had conveniently come due the very moment I was old enough to inherit. It was all starting to feel less like a coincidence and more like a trap. Back on the bus, the rest of the journey passed in a haze of exhaustion and anxiety. As dawn began to break, painting the eastern sky in shades of gray and pale pink, the landscape outside changed again. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills covered in dense forest. The bus began to climb, winding its way up narrow mountain roads. Finally, the driver announced our arrival. Blackwood Creek. I grabbed my box and the envelope and stepped off the bus into the main street of a town that looked like it was holding its breath. The buildings were old, mostly brick and wood, with faded paint and a few empty storefronts. A hardware store, a diner, a post office, and a small real estate office with a large glossy sign that read, "Triton Global Properties, your future in the mountains." The sign felt like a threat. There was no one on the street. A single stoplight blinked yellow over the main intersection, a lonely, rhythmic pulse. According to the map I'd sketched from the deed's description, Sparrow Ridge was about 3 miles outside of town. There were no taxis, no Ubers, just my own 2 feet. The walk was long. The road led out of the small town center and became a cracked 2-lane asphalt ribbon winding through the woods. The morning was cold, and my breath plumed in the air. The sounds were different here. No sirens, no traffic roar, just the rustle of leaves in the wind, the call of a distant bird, the crunch of my sneakers on the gravel shoulder. It was a silence so profound it felt loud. After nearly an hour of walking, I saw it. A rusted, leaning mailbox with the name Vance barely visible beneath a layer of grime and lichen. Behind it, a dirt driveway, overgrown with weeds, disappeared into a thick stand of trees. This was it. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. I pushed through the tangled brush at the mouth of the driveway and started walking. The driveway was longer than I expected, maybe a quarter of a mile, curving through a forest of tall pines and ancient oaks. The trees formed a canopy that blocked out most of the morning light, and the air was cool and still. It felt like I was entering another world. And then the trees opened up, and I saw it. The farmhouse. It was a simple 2-story structure, its white paint peeled and grayed by years of sun and snow. The roof on the porch sagged dangerously, and several windows were boarded up. To the left stood a massive barn, its red paint faded to a dull, dusty rose, one of its huge doors hanging crookedly from a single hinge. The land rolled away from the buildings, a vast expanse of fields choked with weeds and saplings, bordered in the distance by the dark, unbroken line of the forest. It was a picture of neglect, of abandonment. It looked exactly how I felt, broken down, forgotten, weathered by time. But it was also beautiful. The scale of it was breathtaking. The silence, the space, the sheer, stubborn presence of the old buildings. They were still standing. I walked slowly onto the porch, the floorboards groaning under my weight. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the heavy iron key. My hand was shaking as I pushed it into the lock on the front door. It resisted, stiff with rust and disuse. I put my shoulder into it, turning the key with all my strength. There was a loud, grating click that echoed in the morning quiet, the sound of a door being opened for the first time in more than a decade. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, into the dust and the shadows and the ghosts of a life I never knew. The air inside was cold and musty, thick with the smell of dust, dry rot, and time itself. A fine layer of gray powder covered every surface, turning the room into a monochrome photograph of a forgotten life. Sunlight struggled through the grimy windows, cutting sharp, hazy beams through the gloom, illuminating swirling motes of dust. I was standing in what must have been the living room. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth filled with the blackened remains of a long-dead fire. Furniture huddled in the center of the room, draped in white sheets that had yellowed with age. They looked like a family of ghosts, waiting patiently for someone to return. I set my cardboard box down by the door. The sound was unnervingly loud in the profound silence. I walked deeper into the house, my footsteps muffled by the carpet of dust. The kitchen was a time capsule. A thick ceramic mug sat by the sink. A calendar on the wall was turned to August 13 years ago. A faded newspaper was folded on the table, its headline announcing some local news that no longer mattered. Everything was exactly as someone had left it, as if they had just stepped out for a moment and never came back. It was unsettling. This wasn't just an abandoned house. It was an interrupted life. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms. One was clearly a guest room, with a neatly made bed under another sheet. The other was my grandfather's. A simple iron bed frame, a tall wooden dresser, and a small desk by the window. On the desk, a stack of books on carpentry and agriculture sat next to an empty tin cup that had once held pencils. I ran my hand over the dusty surface of the dresser. This was his room. He had slept in that bed, looked out that window. I was standing in the heart of his world, and I felt like a complete intruder. I tried to feel a connection, a sense of belonging, but all I felt was a profound and aching emptiness. He was a stranger to me, and this was a stranger's house. I spent the rest of the morning exploring, moving from room to room, touching things, trying to piece together the man who had lived here. I found his work boots by the back door, caked in dried mud. I found a collection of worn-out records, old country and folk singers I'd never heard of. In a closet, I found his flannel shirts, still hanging, still faintly smelling of wood smoke and something else, something metallic and sharp, like motor oil. The feeling of being watched, not by a person, but by the house itself, grew stronger with every room I entered. It was as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting to see what I would do. It was in the main bedroom, while running my hand along the rough-hewn wooden walls, that I felt it. A loose floorboard, right under the window. It was subtle, just a slight give that wasn't present in the boards around it. Curiosity, or maybe some deeper instinct, took over. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the cold air. I used my fingers to pry at the edge of the board. It was stuck fast. I went back downstairs and rummaged through a closet until I found an old toolbox. It was heavy, filled with rusted wrenches and hammers. I found a crowbar and brought it back upstairs. I wedged the tip of the crowbar into the seam and leaned on it. The wood groaned in protest, and then with a sharp crack, the nails gave way. I lifted the board. Beneath it, nestled in the dark space between the floor joists, was a metal box. It was an old Army surplus ammunition can, painted dark green. It wasn't locked. It was just held shut by 2 heavy latches. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. My hands felt clumsy and numb as I fumbled with the latches. They were stiff, and my fingers slipped several times before I finally got them to spring open with a loud metallic clang. I lifted the heavy lid. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Old photographs? Mementos? More legal papers? I was wrong. The first thing I saw was money. Stacks of it. Bundles of $100 bills wrapped in faded rubber bands. It wasn't a small amount. It was a fortune. I reached in and lifted one of the bundles. The bills were old, worn, but unmistakably real. I counted them, my fingers trembling. $10,000. And there were more bundles, at least 10 or 12 of them. $100,000, maybe more, sitting in a metal box under a floorboard in a forgotten house. My mind couldn't process it. Where did this come from? Why was it hidden here? My $400 debit card suddenly felt like a child's plaything. This was life-changing money. This was escape velocity money. I could walk out of this house, out of this town, and never look back. I could go anywhere, be anyone. But underneath the stacks of cash, there was something else. A thick stack of envelopes, tied together with a piece of twine. They were addressed to me. For Leo, the top one said, in a strong, slightly slanted handwriting. I pulled the stack out. There were dozens of letters. I untied the twine and looked at the first one. It was dated just a few weeks after he had left me at the county office. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold it steady. I sat down on the dusty floor, the cold seeping through my jeans, the smell of old paper and ink filling the air. I opened the first letter. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have come home. It also means my plan worked, at least in part. I hope the money is still here. I saved every dollar for you. It's your start. But it's not the most important thing in this box. The truth is, I need you to know the truth. I didn't leave you, son. I was taken." My vision blurred. The words on the page swam in and out of focus. I read them again, and then a third time. "I didn't leave you. I was taken." A single tear, hot and sharp, fell from my eye and landed on the brittle paper, making the ink bleed just a little. The story of my life, the one foundation I had, cracked open right there on that dusty floor. I sat there for a long time, the letter in my hand, the box of money at my feet, and for the first time since I'd walked through the door, the house didn't feel empty. It felt full of secrets, full of sorrow, and full of a love I never knew existed. The afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the room. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the physical evidence of a life I was just beginning to understand. The money was a real, tangible thing. I counted it. $150,000. In cash. A sum so vast it felt like a dream. Enough to disappear. Enough to start over anywhere in the world, under a new name, with no history. The thought was a powerful lure, a siren song promising a clean slate. But the letters were a stronger anchor. I spent hours reading them, one by one, in chronological order. My grandfather's handwriting was clear and steady at first, growing shakier in the later letters. He wrote to me from a prison cell. That was the first shock. He hadn't just left, he'd been arrested. The letters painted a brutal, heartbreaking picture. Arthur Vance was a carpenter, a man who loved his land more than anything. He'd inherited it, just as I had, and he believed a person's worth was in what they built with their own two hands, not what they took. The trouble started when Triton Global, the same company whose sign I'd seen in town, came calling. They wanted his land. It was a prime location for their planned resort, connecting two of their other large parcels. They made him an offer. He refused. They made a bigger offer. He refused again. "This land isn't for sale, Leo," he wrote in one letter. "It's not a commodity, it's a trust. It was your grandmother's dream to see you grow up here, to teach you how to read the seasons and understand the soil. I couldn't sell that, not for any price." When the offers didn't work, the threats began. Vandalism on the property, dead animals left on his porch. The town, desperate for the jobs Triton promised, turned a blind eye. The sheriff, a man on Triton's payroll, told my grandfather he was on his own. Then came the setup. A local man, a known troublemaker with deep debts to Triton's local manager, accused my grandfather of assault. He claimed Arthur had attacked him after an argument. It was a lie, a complete fabrication, but the man had a broken arm and two friends willing to swear they saw it happen. My grandfather had no witnesses. He was a quiet man, a relative newcomer who kept to himself. The town, swayed by Triton's influence and promises, was ready to believe the worst. "They framed me, son," he wrote, the words on the page seeming to press down with an immense weight. "My lawyer told me I had no chance. A local jury, a bought judge. He said they'd put me away for years. My only option was to take a plea deal, a lesser charge, 2 years in a state facility. It was the only way to ensure I'd get out while you were still a boy. But the system had other plans. Once he was incarcerated, they used his conviction to declare him an unfit guardian. That's when they took me. He fought it from inside, filing appeals, writing letters. But he was just a number in the system, and his voice was easily silenced. The 2 years turned into 5 after a fight inside that he swore was another setup. When he finally got out, he was a convicted felon. He couldn't get a decent job. He tried to come back for me, but his record, his lack of income, they deemed him permanently unfit. He was barred from seeing me. "That was the day my heart truly broke, Leo," he wrote. "To know you were just a few miles away in one of those state homes, and I couldn't reach you. They told me it was for your own good. They told me you'd be better off forgetting about me. I think a part of me died that day." So he did the only thing he could. He started saving. He took the worst jobs, washing dishes, cleaning sewers, working off-the-books demolition jobs for cash. He lived in cheap, rented rooms, eating 1 meal a day, and every single spare dollar went into that ammunition box. He would drive out to the property at night when no one was watching and hide the money under the floorboard. He paid what he could on the taxes, just enough to keep the county from seizing it immediately, letting the bulk of the debt grow, knowing it would all come due eventually. He was playing a long game. He was creating a weapon for me. "This money isn't for a fancy car or a big house, Leo," the last letter explained, written only a few months before his death from a heart attack, the lawyer's letter had said. "This money is your choice. You can take it and run. I wouldn't blame you. Go build a life far away from the poison in this valley. You deserve peace. But there's another option. The land is still here. Triton still wants it. The tax bill is their final weapon. They think the orphan kid who shows up will be broke and scared. They think you'll have no choice but to sell to them for pennies on the dollar to settle the debt. This money is enough to pay the taxes. It's enough to buy your freedom and the freedom of this land. It's enough to fight them. It's a harder road, son. It's a lifetime of work. But your roots are in this soil. I never got to give you a home, but I spent my life saving one for you. What you do with it is up to you. Whatever you choose, know that I loved you. I never, not for 1 second, stopped loving you." I finished the last letter, and the house was completely dark. I hadn't even noticed the sun go down. My face was stiff with dried tears. I cried. I cried for the 5-year-old boy who thought his grandfather had thrown him away. I cried for the old man who died alone in a rented room, saving pennies for a son he couldn't see. I cried for the years we had lost, the life that had been stolen from us by greed and corruption. An overwhelming rage filled me, hot and clean. It burned away the grief, leaving something hard and clear in its place. I looked at the money, then at the letters. Taking the cash and running would be an escape, but it would also be a betrayal. It would mean that Triton Global wins. It would mean my grandfather's sacrifice, his entire broken life, was for nothing. His pain would be their profit. I couldn't let that happen. The decision settled over me, not like a weight, but like a shield. I knew what I had to do. Listen, if you've made it this far into the story, something in it must be speaking to you. Maybe you've had to make a choice that felt impossible. Maybe you've had to choose between the easy road and the right one. It's a lonely place to be. I want you to know you're not alone. We talk about stories like this here because they're real. If you've ever faced something similar, I want to hear about it in the comments. Let's make this a place where we can share those burdens. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss how this all turns out. Now, let's get back to it. Because making the choice was one thing, acting on it was another. The first light of dawn found me not in bed, but sitting at the dusty kitchen table, the letters spread out before me like a map. I had spent the night in a state of suspended animation, caught between the past and the future. The rage from the night before had cooled into a solid, unshakable resolve. My grandfather had given me a choice, and I was going to honor it. I was going to fight. The first step was the most concrete, the taxes. I carefully counted out $32,500 from the bundles of cash. The bills were old and soft, carrying the faint, musty smell of the metal box and the floorboards. Holding that much money in my hands was surreal. It felt heavier than its physical weight, freighted with years of labor and sacrifice. I packed the money into a worn canvas bag I found in a closet. I took the deed, the lawyer's original letter, and my own identification papers. I washed my face with freezing water from the hand pump at the kitchen sink, the shock of the cold a welcome jolt to my system. I put on my cleanest set of clothes. I was about to walk into a government office and hand over a life-altering amount of cash. I couldn't look like a scared kid who'd just crawled out of a hole. I had to look like I belonged. The walk back to Blackwood Creek felt different this time. I wasn't an aimless drifter anymore. I had a purpose. My steps were firm, my gaze straight ahead. When I passed the Triton Global office, I didn't look away. I stared right at the glossy sign, at the smiling, generic family in the photo, and I felt a cold knot of determination tighten in my stomach. You will not win, I thought. The Blackwood County Government Building was a small, unassuming brick structure next to the post office. Inside, it smelled of old paper and stale coffee. I found the tax assessor's office, a small counter behind a pane of thick, scratched glass. A woman with a formidable beehive hairdo and glasses on a chain looked up at me, her expression a perfect blend of boredom and suspicion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she doubted it. "I'm here to pay the property taxes for the Vance property on Sparrow Ridge," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She tapped a few keys on her ancient computer terminal. A frown creased her forehead. "The Vance property? That account is in arrears. It's scheduled for seizure and auction." "I know," I said. "I'm here to settle the full amount." Her eyes narrowed. She looked me up and down, taking in my worn jeans and simple jacket. "The full amount is $32,481.17. She said the number like a challenge, as if daring me to produce it. I unzipped the canvas bag and began placing the stacks of $100 bills on the counter. Her jaw went slack. The boredom in her eyes was replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. She stared at the money, then at my face, then back at the money. The silence in the small office was absolute. We don't usually take cash payments this large," she stammered. "Is there a problem with the money?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "It's legal tender." She swallowed hard. No problem. I need to get the supervisor." She disappeared into a back room. I could hear muffled, urgent whispers. I stood there, my heart pounding, feeling the eyes of everyone in the building on me. A few minutes later, she returned with a man in a rumpled suit. He looked just as flustered. They spent the next hour counting the money, running it through a machine, and filling out a mountain of paperwork. They treated me with a strange new deference, a mix of fear and respect. I was no longer just some kid. I was the kid who walked in with a bag full of cash. Finally, the supervisor stamped a final document with a heavy, satisfying thud and pushed it through the slot to me. "Here you are, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice now smooth and professional. "This is your receipt. The property is paid in full. The lien has been lifted. The land is yours, free and clear." I took the receipt. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt like a treaty, a declaration of independence. I folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket, next to my grandfather's letters. As I turned to leave, the supervisor cleared his throat. "Mr. Vance, if you don't mind me asking, Triton Global had already filed a preliminary bid for that property at the auction." "I know," I said, and walked out the door. The fresh air outside felt like a victory. I had done it. I had fired the first shot. The land was safe, for now. My next stop was a payphone outside the diner. I pulled out the original lawyer's letter. The firm was Abrams and Associates. The letter was signed by a man named Elias Abrams. I dialed the number. A secretary answered. "Abrams and Associates, how may I direct your call?" "I'd like to speak to Mr. Elias Abrams," I said. "It's regarding the estate of Arthur Vance." There was a pause. "One moment, please." A few seconds later, a calm, deep voice came on the line. "This is Elias Abrams." "Mr. Abrams, my name is Leo Vance. I'm Arthur Vance's grandson. I received your letter." There was another pause, this one longer. I could hear the faint sound of a chair creaking, of someone sitting up straighter. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice now holding a new note of intensity. "I've been hoping you would call. I was a friend of your grandfather's, a very good friend. Can you tell me, are you in Blackwood Creek?" "Yes, sir, I am." "Don't move," he said, the calmness in his voice replaced by a sudden urgency. "Stay right where you are. I'm in the city for a court appearance, but I can be there in 3 hours. There are things you need to know, things your grandfather wanted me to tell you in person. Just stay put. And Leo, be careful." The line went dead. I stood there with the receiver in my hand, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The fight was just beginning. 3 hours later, a modest, dark blue sedan pulled up in front of the diner. A man in his late 60s got out. He was tall and thin, with a shock of white hair and a face etched with the kind of lines that come from thinking more than smiling. He wore a simple, well-tailored suit that looked out of place in the rustic town. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the street before landing on me. He walked over, his expression serious. "Leo Vance?" he asked. I nodded. "Mr. Abrams," he offered his hand. His grip was firm, his hand cool. "Call me Elias. I'm glad you called. I was worried you'd just take the money and run." "I thought about it," I admitted. "Your grandfather hoped you would," he said with a faint, sad smile. "He wanted you to have the choice of an easy life. But he also knew you had his blood in you. He hoped you'd choose the hard one. He suggested we talk somewhere private." We got into his car, and I directed him toward the farm. As he drove, the silence was thick with unspoken questions. He handled the car with a quiet competence, his eyes taking in the town, the Triton signs, the landscape. When we turned onto the dirt driveway leading to the house, he slowed the car, a flicker of memory in his eyes. "I haven't been up this road in 15 years, he said softly. "It looks smaller." We parked in front of the house. He got out and just stood there for a moment, looking at the sagging porch and the peeling paint. He loved this place, Elias said, more to himself than to me. It broke his heart to leave it. We went inside. The house was just as I'd left it, cold and filled with dusty light. I had left the ammunition box open on the floor of the bedroom upstairs. Elias walked through the room slowly, his gaze lingering on the furniture, the calendar on the wall, the mug by the sink. It was clear he had been here before, in another lifetime. "I was Arthur's lawyer during the trial," he began, finally turning to face me. "His friend, too. We grew up together. I told him to take the plea deal. It was the worst advice I've ever given." His voice was heavy with regret. "We thought it would be a quick way out of a bad situation. We underestimated them. We underestimated how much they wanted this land." He explained the legal situation in stark, pragmatic terms. Triton's strategy was what he called economic attrition. They couldn't force a sale, so they used their immense resources to make holding on to the land impossible. The false arrest, the prison sentence, that was step one. It removed my grandfather from the board. The tax debt was step two. They had connections in the county office. They made sure the delinquency notices were lost in the mail, that the debt was allowed to grow to an insurmountable sum, timed to mature the moment a legally adult heir appeared. "They expected you to be an 18-year-old kid with nothing," Elias said, his eyes hard. "They'd offer you maybe 10,000 for the deed, a fraction of its worth, just to make their problem go away. You'd sign, they'd pay the taxes themselves, and the land would be theirs. Clean, legal, and utterly corrupt." "But I paid the taxes," I said, the receipt in my pocket suddenly feeling like a shield. Elias's expression shifted. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face for the first time. "You did, didn't you? I checked with the county clerk on my way into town. You have no idea the chaos you've caused, Leo. You threw a $100,000 wrench into a multi-million-dollar machine. Their plan, their whole timeline, is in ruins." The victory felt good, but Elias quickly tempered it with a dose of reality. "This isn't over," he warned. "You've won a battle, not the war. They won't just walk away. They'll come at you now, directly." He laid out the likely next steps. They would try to buy me out, and the offers would be substantial. Far more than the 150,000 I had left. They might offer $1 million, maybe more. If I refused, they would resort to other tactics. They would challenge the deed, claiming some long-lost relative had a better claim. They would file frivolous lawsuits for imagined environmental violations or zoning infractions, trying to bury me in legal fees. And if that didn't work, he left the next part unspoken, but I understood. The threats, the vandalism my grandfather had endured, that would start again. "Your grandfather knew this," Elias said, his voice dropping. "He knew he was leaving you not just a home, but a war. The money he saved isn't just for the taxes. It's a war chest. It's to help you survive what's coming." He then told me something that made the floor feel unsteady beneath my feet. "Arthur gathered evidence, Leo. Over the years, even after he got out, he found people who were willing to talk. The man who accused him of assault? He's a wreck, eaten by guilt. He confessed to a friend. The sheriff at the time? He retired and moved away, but not before telling his wife everything. Arthur had names, dates, sworn affidavits. He was building a case. A massive civil suit against Triton Global for malicious prosecution and conspiracy. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Where's the evidence?" Elias shook his head sadly. He kept it hidden. He never told me where. He was paranoid, and rightfully so. He said he kept it somewhere no one would ever think to look. He died before he could tell me. Finding that evidence, that's the only way to win this for good. It's the bomb that could blow their whole operation in this valley sky high. So that was my new mission, not just to defend the land, but to attack, to find the proof that could exonerate my grandfather and expose Triton for what they were. The task felt monumental, impossible. I was one kid against a corporate giant. "You're not alone," Elias said, as if reading my mind. "I'll represent you, pro bono, for Arthur. We'll fight them in the courts. But you have to do the work on the ground. You have to live here. You have to find what he hid." After Elias left, promising to start filing the initial legal paperwork to put Triton on notice, the house felt different again. It wasn't a tomb anymore. It was a fortress. It was a puzzle box. My grandfather had left me a key, a map, and a mission. The next morning, I woke with the sun. The first thing I did was make a list. Food, tools, supplies. I still had over $100,000, but I was careful. This money had to last. I walked into town and went to the hardware store. The man behind the counter, a grizzled old-timer named Gus, watched me with curiosity as I bought a new axe, a shovel, work gloves, and a heavy-duty flashlight. "Big plans for the old Vance place?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Just cleaning up," I said. He nodded slowly. "A lot of people have had big plans for that place, none of them named Vance." His words hung in the air, a subtle warning. I spent the next few weeks in a blur of hard, physical labor. I started with the house. I tore off the rotting porch roof, the wood splintering under my crowbar. I hauled debris to a burn pile. I scrubbed the floors, washed the windows, and slowly, painstakingly, began to peel away the years of neglect. The work was brutal. My muscles ached in ways I never knew they could. My hands, soft from a life indoors, were quickly covered in blisters that turned into calluses. But every drop of sweat felt like a tribute. Every repaired board felt like a victory. I was pouring my anger and my grief into the work, and the house was slowly starting to breathe again. I also began my search. Every night, exhausted from the day's labor, I would take my flashlight and search. I looked for loose bricks in the fireplace, hollow spots in the walls, hidden compartments in the furniture. I searched the barn, a cavernous space filled with old, rusted farm equipment and the smell of hay and thyme. I climbed into the loft, my light cutting through a thick darkness that felt ancient. I searched the outbuildings, a small workshop, a chicken coop, a smokehouse. Nothing. The evidence was as elusive as my grandfather's ghost. One afternoon, while clearing brush near the edge of the property, a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize rolled up my driveway. Two men in expensive suits got out. They looked as out of place as a wolf in a sheep pen. The driver was a large, imposing man with a blank expression. The passenger was older, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Leo Vance?" the older man asked, his voice smooth as silk. "My name is Robert Sterling. I'm the regional vice president for Triton Global." The war had come to my doorstep. Robert Sterling walked toward me with the easy confidence of a man who was used to getting his way. He didn't offer to shake my hand. He just stopped a few feet away, his expensive leather shoes looking ridiculous on the overgrown lawn. His eyes swept over the farmhouse, the barn, and then me, a quick, dismissive appraisal. "Quite a project you've got here," he said, his tone a mix of feigned sympathy and condescension. "We were sorry to hear about your grandfather. He was a stubborn man." "He was principled," I corrected him, my voice flat. My hands, resting on the handle of the axe I'd been using to clear saplings, tightened. Sterling's smile flickered. Of course. Look, Mr. Vance, Leo, let's not waste each other's time. I'm here to make you an offer, a very generous one. We know the land has sentimental value, and we're prepared to compensate you for that. $250,000, cash. You sign the deed over to us, and you can walk away from all this trouble. Start a new life. $250,000. The number hung in the air, glittering and obscene. It was more money than I could have imagined just a week ago. Enough to make all my problems disappear. Enough to be free. I thought of my grandfather, living in squalor, saving $1 at a time. This amount would have seemed like a king's ransom. The land isn't for sale, I said. Sterling's smile vanished completely. I don't think you understand your position, son. This isn't a negotiation. That's a courtesy offer. You're a kid, alone, on a dilapidated property you can't possibly manage. You have no friends here, no resources. We, on the other hand, have a great many resources. This project is worth hundreds of millions of dollars to us. Your 200 acres are a very small but very necessary piece of that puzzle. We will acquire it. The only question is whether you walk away with $250,000 in your pocket or whether you walk away with nothing but legal bills and a lot of heartache. It was a threat, delivered with the calm precision of a surgeon. He was telling me, in no uncertain terms, that they would crush me. I have a lawyer, I said, the words feeling thin in the face of his immense confidence. Sterling actually laughed, a short, humorless bark. Elias Abrams? Yes, we know. A fine man, but he's a small-town lawyer tilting at windmills. We have a team of 100 lawyers in our New York office. They eat men like Elias for breakfast. Don't be a fool, Leo. Take the money. My answer is no, I said. I looked him directly in the eye, channeling every ounce of my grandfather's stubbornness. This land is my home. You'll have to kill me to get it. The air grew cold. The friendly facade was gone. Sterling's eyes were like chips of ice. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the larger man beside him. A shame, Sterling said, turning to walk back to the SUV. We tried to do this the easy way. He got in the car. As it drove away, the larger man, the silent one, lingered for a second. He looked at me, then at the house, and then he spat on the ground before getting into the driver's seat. The message was clear. The gloves were off. The days that followed were a testament to Sterling's promise. The harassment began. At first it was subtle. Cars driving slowly past my driveway at all hours of the night. My mailbox was smashed. Then it escalated. A pile of trash was dumped at the end of my driveway. One morning, I woke up to find the words, "Get out," spray-painted in huge red letters across the side of my barn. The psychological toll was immense. Every noise at night made me jump. The isolation of the farm, once a comfort, now felt like a vulnerability. I was alone, a single target in the middle of 200 acres. Elias filed police reports, but the local sheriff was unhelpful, citing a lack of evidence. It was clear whose side he was on. The legal attack started too. I received a certified letter informing me that Triton was suing me. The claim was that my septic system was old and likely leaking into the groundwater, a violation of county environmental codes. It was a baseless accusation, designed to force me into expensive testing and legal fees. Elias assured me we could fight it, but it was a drain on my time, my energy, and the war chest my grandfather had left me. The search for the evidence became desperate. I knew it was my only real weapon. I reread my grandfather's letters, searching for a clue, a hint. Somewhere no one would ever think to look, he had written. I had looked everywhere I could think of. In the house, in the barn, in the workshop. I dug up loose stones in the foundation. I checked inside hollowed-out books. Nothing. One rainy afternoon, I was in the barn, seeking shelter from a sudden downpour. I was frustrated, exhausted, and close to despair. The red paint on the wall where they had sprayed their message was a constant glaring reminder of my precarious situation. I sat on an old hay bale, looking at the massive, complex structure of the barn itself. My grandfather had built it. The letters said so. He'd cut the timber himself from the woods on the property. It was his masterpiece. I looked up at the huge beams, the intricate joinery. He was a carpenter, a master craftsman. His whole life was about building things and hiding things. My eyes scanned the interior of the barn again, but this time not for a hiding place. I looked at it as a piece of construction, and then I saw it. High up, near the peak of the roof, was a single crossbeam that was different from the others. It was the same size, the same type of wood, but the joinery, it was too perfect. The other beams were held in place with rough, hand-forged iron brackets. This one was joined with a seamless mortise and tenon joint, almost invisible from the ground. It was a piece of fine furniture making in the middle of a rustic barn. It was showing off. It was a signature. Why would he do that? Unless it wasn't just a beam. I scrambled up the hay bales stacked against the wall, then pulled myself up onto a lower beam, my heart hammering. I was covered in cobwebs and dust, but I didn't care. I shimmied my way across the lower beam until I was directly under the unique one. From this angle, I could see a faint seam along the bottom. It wasn't a solid beam. It was a box, masterfully crafted to look like a beam. Adrenaline surged through me. This was it. It had to be. It was a place no one would ever think to look. Who would climb 50 feet into the air to inspect the joinery of a single roof beam in a dusty old barn? I made my way back down, my mind racing. I needed a ladder, a tall one. I found a rickety old extension ladder in the workshop and dragged it into the barn. It was barely tall enough. I extended it to its full length, the top leaning precariously against the beam. The climb was terrifying. The ladder swayed with every movement. The ground seemed miles away. But I kept going, my eyes fixed on my goal. I reached the top, clinging to the ladder with one hand, and ran my other hand along the bottom of the beam. I felt a small, almost invisible indentation. A button. I pressed it. There was a soft click, and a section of the beam's underside swung down on a hidden hinge, revealing a hollow compartment inside. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and I saw it. A long, thin, waterproof metal cylinder. I reached in, my fingers closing around it. It was heavy. I tucked it inside my jacket and made my way back down the ladder, my hands shaking so badly I was surprised I didn't fall. I sat on the hay bale, the cylinder in my lap. It took me a full minute to get my breathing under control. With trembling hands, I unscrewed the cap. Inside, rolled tightly, was a stack of papers. Affidavits, signed and notarized. A written confession from the man who had accused my grandfather of assault, detailing how Triton's manager had paid him and coached him on what to say. A statement from the retired sheriff's wife, recounting her husband's deathbed confession about taking bribes. And a series of detailed financial records, obtained by one of my grandfather's old friends who worked at the local bank, showing a pattern of illicit payments from a Triton subsidiary to key county officials. It was all there. A complete, undeniable record of the conspiracy. My grandfather hadn't just saved me a home. He'd left me a sword, and I was finally ready to use it. The next morning, I drove into the city to meet Elias at his office. I didn't call ahead. I walked in, the metal cylinder tucked into my bag, and asked to see him. When he saw what I had, he spread the documents out on his large mahogany desk, and for a long time he was silent. He read each one carefully, his expression shifting from hope to grim satisfaction, and finally to something that looked like awe. "My God, Leo," he whispered, looking up at me. "He did it. The old son of a gun actually did it. This is everything. This isn't just a defense. This is an atom bomb." He explained the power of what we now held. The confession, the financial records. This wasn't just a civil matter anymore. This was evidence of criminal activity, bribery, conspiracy, perjury. This could bring down not just Robert Sterling, but the entire Triton operation in the state. It could lead to federal charges. "They thought they were fighting a scared kid over a piece of land," Elias said, a fierce light in his eyes. "They're about to find out they're at war with the United States Department of Justice." The choice now was how to use it. We could go public, leak it to the press, or we could play it smarter. Elias recommended a third option. We would file our civil suit against Triton, but we would attach copies of this evidence to a private letter addressed directly to Triton's CEO and their board of directors in New York. We would also send a copy to the state's Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney's Office. It was a multi-pronged attack. It gave Triton a chance to settle, to make this go away quietly and hugely, before the criminal investigations began in earnest. It was a checkmate move. They could fight and have their company's name dragged through a massive criminal scandal, or they could surrender. Elias drafted the letters while I waited. Watching him work was like watching a master craftsman. His words were precise, sharp, and devastating. 2 days later, a courier delivered the packages. Then we waited. The silence was deafening. The harassment at the farm stopped. The black SUV was gone. The lawsuit over the septic tank was abruptly dropped. It was as if a storm had suddenly passed. I spent the time working on the farm, but the work felt different now. It wasn't fueled by anger anymore. It was fueled by hope. I wasn't just defending the land. I was building on it. I repaired the sagging porch, replacing the old rotten wood with fresh timber from the local mill. I cleared the fields, pulling weeds, tilling the soil. I was bringing the land back to life, just as my grandfather would have wanted. A week after we sent the letters, Elias called me. His voice was calm, but I could hear the undercurrent of triumph. "They folded, Leo," he said. "They folded completely." It wasn't Robert Sterling who called him. It was the head of Triton's entire North American legal department. The offer was staggering. They would pay a massive, undisclosed sum to settle our civil suit. They would issue a public apology and fund the creation of a permanent legal fund in my grandfather's name to help others in the valley fight predatory developers. They would pull out of Blackwood Creek entirely, selling their existing land holdings to a state conservation trust at a loss. In exchange, the original documents my grandfather had collected would be turned over and sealed. They were trying to contain the criminal fallout, but Elias assured me it was too late. The Attorney General's office had already opened a full-scale investigation. Sterling and his cronies were going to face justice. That evening, I walked out to the edge of the fields as the sun was setting. The sky was awash in orange and purple. The house stood behind me, its windows glowing with warm light. The barn was silent and steady. I had won. My grandfather had won. The land was safe. It was truly mine. But as I stood there, looking out over the 200 acres, a new question began to form in my mind. The fight was over. Now, what was I going to build? The months that followed the settlement were a strange, quiet time. The money from Triton, a sum so large Elias had to set up a complex trust for me, sat in an account untouched. The number was abstract, unreal. It didn't feel like my money. It felt like my grandfather's victory, translated into a language I didn't fully understand. The real prize was the land, the quiet, the freedom from fear. The investigation into Triton Global became a major news story. Robert Sterling and several county officials were indicted. The town of Blackwood Creek, once cowed into submission, began to find its voice again. People I passed on the street who had once looked through me would now nod, a small, quiet acknowledgement. Gus, the owner of the hardware store, gave me a discount on a new set of tools. "Vance discount," he'd grumbled, not looking at me. "Your granddad was a good man. About time someone remembered that." I spent the fall and winter working on the farm. The physical labor was my anchor. I replaced the roof on the house, learning how from one of my grandfather's old carpentry books. I restored the windows, reglazing the panes, sanding and repainting the frames. I got the old well pump working again, and for the first time in over a decade, clean, cold water flowed from the taps in the kitchen. I was slowly, methodically erasing the neglect. But I was careful to preserve the character of the place. I left the worn spots on the floorboards, the nicks in the door frames. They were part of its story, part of our story. I spent a lot of time thinking about what to do next. I had the land, I had the money. I could have done anything. I could have leveled the old barn and built a modern mansion. I could have turned the fields into a private golf course. I could have sold it all and lived a life of leisure. But none of that felt right. It felt like a betrayal of everything my grandfather had sacrificed for. He saved this place not for its monetary value, but for what it represented. A home. A place to put down roots. A place to build something that lasts. One cold winter evening, I was sitting by the stone fireplace, a fire crackling in the hearth for the first time since I'd arrived. I had my old, worn copy of a book from the group home in my lap. And it hit me. The answer was so obvious, I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it before. My entire life had been defined by what I didn't have. A family, a home, a place to belong. When I aged out of Northgate, I was thrown into the world with $400 and a list of homeless shelters. I was one of the lucky ones. I had an inheritance I didn't know about. What about the others? The kids who walked out of those same doors with nothing but a cardboard box and a future full of uncertainty. What if this place, this land my grandfather saved, could be for them? What if it wasn't just my home? What if it could be a home for others like me? The idea took root and grew with a fierce, undeniable energy. It was the reason for everything. The money wasn't a prize, it was a resource. The land wasn't a retreat, it was an opportunity. I wasn't just the heir to Arthur Vance's legacy, I was its steward. The next day, I called Elias. I explained my idea. I wanted to use the settlement money and the farm to create a foundation, the Sparrow Ridge Trust. Its mission would be to provide a transitional home for youth aging out of the foster care and juvenile systems. A place where they could stay for a year or two, a soft landing. But it wouldn't just be a place to sleep. The barn wouldn't be for storage, it would be a workshop. We could teach skills, carpentry, mechanics, agriculture. The fields wouldn't be empty, they would be a working farm, growing food for the residents, with the excess sold at local markets. We would build a few small, sustainable cabins on the property for housing. We would give them not just a roof over their heads, but a purpose, a community, a chance to build something with their own two hands, just like my grandfather did. Elias was silent on the other end of the phone for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you, Leo," he said. "So incredibly proud." With Elias's legal guidance, we started the process. We formed the nonprofit. We hired an architect who specialized in sustainable design to help plan the cabins and the workshop conversion. We hired a farm manager, a young woman with a degree in regenerative agriculture. The news spread through the county. Some were skeptical, but many, remembering the arrogance of Triton and the quiet dignity of my grandfather, were supportive. People started to show up. Gus from the hardware store dropped off a truckload of donated lumber. A retired electrician offered to help wire the new workshop for free. A group of women from the church organized a drive for bedding and kitchen supplies. The community that had once turned its back on my grandfather was now helping to build his true legacy. The work was slow, but it was steady. The first cabin went up that spring. I was there every day, working alongside the small construction crew, learning, building. When we hammered the last nail into the roof of that first small home, it felt more satisfying than any legal victory, more valuable than any amount of money. It was real. A few months later, the first resident arrived. His name was Marcus. He was 18, just like I had been. He walked up the driveway carrying a duffel bag, his expression a mixture of suspicion and desperate hope that I recognized all too well. He looked at the farmhouse, the big red barn that was now a fully equipped workshop, the neat rows of vegetables starting to sprout in the fields, and the small, clean cabin that was waiting for him. I walked out to meet him. I didn't say much. I just shook his hand. "Welcome to Sparrow Ridge," I said. "Welcome home." He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the same kid who had stepped off a bus in this town less than a year ago, lost and alone. But this time, it was different. This time, there was someone here to meet him. I stood on the porch that evening, watching the light go on in Marcus's cabin. I wasn't an orphan in a dead man's house anymore. I was part of something bigger. My grandfather didn't just leave me a piece of land. He left me a purpose. He taught me that a home isn't something you inherit. It's something you build. And the best homes are the ones you build for others. This whole journey, from that gray institution to this green and vibrant land, taught me one thing above all else. Your past doesn't have to be your future. The wounds you carry can become the seeds of the garden you grow. What we're building here at Sparrow Ridge is just getting started. It's a testament to second chances. If this story has meant something to you, if you believe in the power of building a new life from the wreckage of an old one, then I hope you'll join our community.